Storytelling is healing. Sharing is powerful. My experiences as a queer person of color at Smith College are reflected in my community.
For me, queer is more of like an action rather than an adjective. To be queer, you have to be actively trying to dismantle things that you think are wrong or oppressive about like society or about the culture that we live in. The norm in our society is white as well as, you know, straight, heteronormative, whatever. But it's like primarily white. So if you are a person of color who is actively like trying to live as a person of color and not trying to assimilate or to be as white as possible, that's already pretty queer.
I think that identifying as queer is really politicized for me.
I tend to identify as queer because I think that it gives a broader understanding of who I am and what my politics are.
My parents aren't from this country, so they're like first thought was Americanization. You're gay because you're here.
Some people, I think, who present themselves differently don't have to put in as much effort into being seen as queer. Like even if they don't explicitly say it, or even when they do, it's like, oh, duh, of course, or like, oh, that makes sense. But whenever I do, I feel like, oh, really? Oh, I didn't know.
I don't remember the last time I have come out as like queer. So in that way I don't have to come out, but I do have to come out a lot as trans.
I'm femme presenting and people assume that I'm straight until I say otherwise.
I think coming out is unnecessary and that we shouldn't have to. And when we get to a time period when people don't need to come out, I think that's when I'll feel most comfortable, because it'll just be me existing and you existing, and you're gay? Oh, sky's blue. Like, you shouldn't have, I don't think you should have to come out anymore. Maybe to like create solidarity, but not as a way of identifying yourself.
I think it's pretty interesting that a lot of the time at Smith, if there is a couple with a person of color involved, it's usually a person of color and a white person. There are very few couples that are two people of color, and even fewer that are two people of color of like the same race or ethnicity, which is not to say that, you know, people should date within their race or whatever, but it is interesting that in order to gain social capital at this school, you have to be involved with white people or the white crowds, or, you know, the people of color on this campus who are like very highly, you know, like revered as being attractive are people who meet a certain standard of like white aesthetic in the way that they dress or the way that they present themselves.
It's interesting because I feel like queerness has a face here, and that face is not reflected in my own. And, you know, it's like I think there's value in, you know, people of color being with each other.
My first relationship while in the area was with a person of color who I met through the Bridge program at Smith College, which is a program for people of color, and one of the first queer people of color that I met within that group is who I felt really connected to, and as friends, and then a relationship happened after that. Dating after my first relationship here has been interesting. It's been more about the sex than it's been about the connection.
I think that if I looked Filipino, if I had darker skin, if I had a broader nose, I would be less desirable.
In general, I mean, it's a white culture, so unless you're being fetishized in some way, you're always going to be less desirable than someone who's white.
Hair is obviously always a big thing. I remember struggling because someone told me I had big lips. Immediate reaction was like, this is really reminding me of like grotesque figure, and that's so uncomfortable that I can't even express it to you.
I've always been tokenized, always, my whole life.
People are really defensive about being white. Wow, Smith, this like queer utopia, all my friends are queer and liberal, and I realized that race was something that wasn't being talked about, but obviously we had such different experiences and opinions around how important race was and like how to talk about race. When I'm at home, I definitely, like don't blend in, and coming to Smith, for the first time, I felt like I did blend in more.
I haven't said anything to anyone out of respect, mostly for my parents, but also I don't think it would go over well. And, it's like, they're Baptist.
Being a first-generation American within my family, my parents having immigrated from Guyana in South America. So those are the center of our conversations.
I have a really good relationship with my mom, who I think just doesn't care that much. Like, I don't think that she thinks it's that important.
Smith doesn't have a whole lot of Filipinos. And I think that was something that I realized was like missing in my experience here, that I felt like an emptiness that I really couldn't fill with anything.
Whenever any racialized situation happens on campus, I feel isolated.
And I think it usually happens in the classroom. Reading Huckleberry Finn. I spoke to my professor and I was like, this is extremely triggering. I can't get through the first 10 pages. I don't think anybody else in that room understood that. I think building community and solidarity is just really based on intentionality, and it's something that you have to seek out.
I gravitate towards people who can relate to some facets of my identity, or are aware and care about educating themselves and care about being conscious.
I'm just standing together. I felt so connected to people just by silently standing with them, and sometimes I feel with having conversation with them. And I think what connects us is not only the way we're feeling, but the way our society sees us and expects us to be feeling.
Smith is really good at making people believe that it's super forward thinking, or that everyone finds acceptance here. Or
Smith has, as an institution, it's made me feel more uncomfortable than I have in my entire life.
We need to have administrators and faculty and admissions that really cares and recognizes that there are students here who are feeling alienated and feeling hurt by the institution and the way that it works.
people are shamed and silenced here. Like anywhere else, it's just almost unexpected. And so I feel like it's kind of shocking, or it hurts more when that happens, because you expect to be supported in this place that so heavily emphasizes supporting its students, but it means certain kinds of students with certain kinds of problems, not everyone.
Storytelling is healing. Sharing is powerful.